All right, so anybody ever been envious?
Oh, yeah.
What does the word envy mean to you?
Jealousy.
Okay. Jealousy. What else? Something somebody else has. Absolutely. Now, is jealousy, envy... Look, I wrote that up here on the board. Are they the same thing? What do you think? Would you see jealousy or envy as the same thing?
Well, in both of them, you may just boil it down to you're not willing to get up and work to get what somebody else has got. I don't know how you plan on getting whatever it is you're envious of. But
Well, that becomes another word on the line of this thought is sloth, which is laziness and inability to, or an unwillingness to get up and do. Right? Envy, jealousy, the concept of...
Let me throw out another word, covetousness. How does that
That's another big
relate
word.
to-
Covetousness. I'm not going to try to spell that. All right.
C-O-V?
Don't embarrass me. C-O...
V-E-T-O-U-S-N-E-S-S.
See, that's even... I didn't even have to make myself look silly. Well, I always look silly. Right, envy. So, do we think that jealousy and envy may be the same thing? Do they kind of operate the same way in our heads? Do we think about them like that? We don't typically say, stop being envious. We say what? You're just jealous, don't we? That's kind of what we say. We'll say, well, you're just jealous because this, that, or whatever. Because how does this typically present itself? Envy, jealousy, covetousness. How does that present itself in our daily life? If somebody says that we are jealous or envious or covetousness, covetry, that's not a word.
well, at the very least, it shows there's a breakdown in boundaries.
Not based on boundaries, but how does it present? What typically happens if somebody says, well, you're just jealous of that person?
I think there's an unrecognizable falsehood behind it all. Because the assumption is, boy, if I could have it like them, or if I could have that, it would be nice. But in reality, it's not necessarily going to bring you happiness.
Okay, so, all right, do we not understand my question? When somebody looks at you and says, you are just being jealous, what has typically happened?
You've been fussing about something somebody else has.
Yes.
Show anger.
Showing angry towards something somebody has. You're fussing about somebody else. How many of you break somebody else down? Tear somebody else down? Well, they're just blah, blah, blah. Well, they didn't really earn that, or they didn't, or that was just given to them, or whatever, right? Is that not typically, it can be an inward. Envy can be inward feeling, or it can be a what? Outward feeling, can it not? You ever been envious of somebody? Ever been jealous of somebody?
Oh, yeah.
Is it only envy or jealousy or covetousness or whatever if it's said out loud? What do you think? What do you think? All right. In this process here, is that typically you well-wishing or not? Man, I'm really happy that they got that. Man, I know they've worked really hard for that. They've tried really hard to earn that. I know they've been working towards that promotion, that new house, that new car, that new promotion, whatever it happens to be. That would be the opposite of that, wouldn't it?
It might be bitterness.
Bitterness can be another way. I think so, maybe. Right? The law of envy, law number 8. The New Testament speaks strongly against the envious heart. Consider James. You desire but do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. From James 4:2. What does envy have to do with boundaries? Here's the writer's talking about this. Envy is probably the basest emotion we have. When was the first time... It gets out of line in the scripture just a little bit. But when was the first time envy presented itself that we are aware of?
Cain and Abel?
Well, it's pretty early. Right? He was jealous or envious of what?
Of what Cain had.
No.
What
Flip
Abel
it around. There you go.
couldn't
Right.
remember.
That's all right. That's all right.
The
Right.
offering that one brought was pleasing and
Right.
Satan.
When Eve was envious of God and his.
So you look at Eve. What if there's something before that?
Like, if you could say that Lucifer was envious of God's all power, his power over the universe.
Yes, who else said it? Somebody else said it.
Satan.
Satan. Right? Why was there a war in heaven? That happened before this. Why was there a war in heaven? Who is actually envious, right? When you go back to the garden, the serpent approached who? Eve, and made her question what?
what God had commanded.
What God had commanded, right? The Bible says that he had a wish, right, excuse me. What does envy have to do with boundaries? Envy is probably the basest emotion we have. A direct result of the fall, it was Satan's sin. The Bible says that he had a wish to be like the Most High, Isaiah 14:14. He envied God and he tempted Adam and Eve with the same idea, telling them that they could be what? Right? As God. Or like God. Right? If you just what? Satan and our parents, Adam and Eve, were not satisfied with who they were and could rightfully become. They wanted what they did not have, and it destroyed them. Envy defines good as what I do not possess and hates the good that it has. And so, we are envious of what we want, of what we what? What we don't have. So, why is envy a problem in boundaries? Is it wrong to want something? Is it wrong to look at, say, somebody's house or somebody's car or somebody's job or somebody's promotion or somebody's whatever? Or is it wrong to say, man, I really like that. I really like their house. I really like their car. We're talking physical things. They're not always just physical things. But you ever looked at somebody, man, I wish I could speak like them. Or, man, I wish I had that servant heart that they have, or whatever that happens to be. We can be envious or jealous, but is it necessary envy or jealous just because we wish we were something like that or had something like that?
David was envious of another man's wife.
Right? Turned to sin on his part. His was actually envy or jealousy. Right? What else?
I feel like it's not wrong to want what others have, but if it drives you to think like, oh man, I wish they fell down the stairs so I could get whatever they have. For instance, if they I don't know, if you're envious of someone's job, I wish they got hurt and had to
Man, I wish they could make a mistake and
Yeah,
they get
something like
fired
that.
so I could have it. That's an interesting way to put that. I like that.
Well, I kind of go along with Timothy. I think it goes from oh, it would be nice to have something like that to well, they don't deserve it more than I should have that more than, or I should be in that situation better than, they don't deserve it more than I do, or I deserve more. I think when you cross that line from oh, that would be nice to I deserve more than they do, or they shouldn't have it.
From well-wishing to what?
I guess the
What'd you say?
Ill wishing.
No, it could be ill-wishing. That's a good word. Ill-wishing. I don't think that's a word. That's okay.
You know,
We're making up things today. It's all right.
the thing
Malinger.
about it is, from the outside, living in that big house may seem good and all that, but you don't know what they're going through every month to keep that house.
Okay, so an interesting thought on that. Anybody ever thought that? Man, they got a really nice house, but then I wonder what it takes to keep that house up. I wonder what it
Insurance.
costs to manage that. Insurance, electricity,
Taxes.
all the things, right? I worked for a delivery company when I was in high school, and we did parties at different locations. We did a lot of Indy 500 parties. We did parties for the vice president at the time. We did parties at all these huge houses up in an area called Carmel. or Geist, right? And this was one of these reservoirs, and they tend to build what kind of houses around reservoirs? Multi-million-dollar homes. I mean, 10, 20, 30 million-dollar homes. Well, we go to these houses to set up parties at these for whatever random reason these parties were. And you pull up to these houses and they're gated. You got to get in the gated community. The guy who owned Lucid Technologies was in Carmel, Indiana, and we'd go drop stuff at his house, and you had to go through it. You had to push the button and get buzzed in, and then you had to drive really slow. The people who own the company that owns, I can't think of the name of the company, that owns Cool Springs Gallery up in Nashville, their corporate headquarters was in Indianapolis at the time, and we would go out to his house. He had a golf course on his house, a professionally designed Arnold Palmer golf course on his property. That's how much money in this house was. Here's the interesting thing about these houses. You're looking at them, you're going, wow, blah, 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 blah. You know what? Nobody was ever there. And when you went in the house, it was somewhat sparsely decorated. And from my understanding of a lot of these houses, they may have decorated the first floor, but the rest of the floors were what?
Empty.
Empty, because they couldn't afford to decorate the rest of the house, but it was all about the way it looked, right? And then they had to spend so much time doing what?
Working.
They had to work so much that they really never got to enjoy it. Most of those houses had 2 people living in them. There weren't even kids in the house, and they had these monstrous properties, right? Right? Do I well wish those people? Man, I'm really glad you were able to achieve this. Or do you get ill wishing? Man, it must be nice to have that too. Anybody ever felt that way? Oh, look, he bought another truck. Oh, look, he bought the newest, whatever it is. Sam, what is it? The newest Silverado with the set bumpers and the whatever. Right? I don't want one of the electric cars. They just make my head hurt. But, right? Envy and jealousy, right? We look at those things and we wish we had what they had, but it's not a well-wishing. Man, I'm really happy for them. I'm really glad for them that they were able to accomplish this, right? Anybody who is close to retirement age and somebody they know retires, right? And you're like, man, I'm so happy for them, right? You ever felt like that? My brother's retired. His wife's retired. They moved to Florida on the beach. I'd hate it if they got bit by a jellyfish. That would just be awful. You want to well wish them, but then you got a little ill wish for them too, right? The jealousy. Right, there's a little bit of fun in that, but there's also, you can wish somebody that. You can wish you had something like they had, but when does it become envy or jealousy?
I guess when you start wishing, like not even like super bad stuff, but you were like wishing negative things upon them. Not even like super dramatic, like I hope they like break their legs. It could be even like, man, I hope they like stub their toe on the
I'm
Lord.
just glad I don't have to pay for that big house and those big trucks. I'm thankful for that. They can have them. I don't want to pay for them.
Part of it gets to be where you begin to feel, why don't I, and you start putting yourself down because I don't have it. I'm feel inadequate.
Yes, go ahead.
I become, from instead of saying, boy, I'd like to get that, and it's not even saying, well, if something happens to them, it becomes, I just can't ever get there. And you start putting yourself down and you start realizing, and eventually you get to the thing is, I'm inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
I can't, I don't deserve it. I'm never going to have it. And I'll just give up.
The writer makes this comment. He says, this is not to say that it is wrong to want things we do not have, right? That's one of the things I think drives us to do better, right? I talk about, right, being content with where you are, right? I don't really like the word happy because I don't know that we'll ever reach there because happy moves around a lot, right? We've talked about that 10,000 times. What are we supposed to be? We had a whole series of classes on being content, right? Being okay where we are. That doesn't mean we don't shoot for something else, right? We can be happy where we are. We can be okay with where we are, but we might want to improve. I'd like to get the next this or the next that or whatever it happens to be, right? God has said that He will give us the desires of our heart, as long as, arguably, quotations here, as long as it goes along with His plan. The problem with envy is that it focuses outside our boundaries onto others. If we are focusing on what others have or have accomplished, we are neglecting our responsibilities and will ultimately have an empty heart. Look at the difference in Galatians 4. Each one should test their own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. Now listen to that. Each one should test their own actions. What's that mean to you? When you put something to the test, what are you doing? My dad worked for Allison's Transmissions in Indianapolis. His buddy, Chris, worked in a division of the company that tested transmission drive shafts. Is that the right word for it? Runs down the center of the transmission, turns it. All right, so it bends back and forth, right? His job was to see how long a particular steel rod would last. And I said, don't you want them to last forever? He said, he looked at me, I was young. He said, why would we want that? Then nobody would replace their transmissions. He put those steel rods to the test, right? He was testing, how strong they were, how long they would last, what their bend strength was, whatever that happened to be. We've all seen videos of that stuff, right? How do you put yourself to the test? Your own actions, right? If you want something somebody else has, what do? If you have appropriate boundaries, which means, man, I'm really glad that they have this, and I'm really excited for them that they have that. Man, I wish I could this, that, or whatever. So instead of getting mad about that and then putting yourself in a funk, as Bubba was talking about, where we turn it back on ourselves and we're like, man, I'm just a failure. And then you tend to do what? Give up, right? You start to give up. Then you get bitter and you get angry. Who said bitterness earlier? Bitterness, right? We become bitter at these other people because they have something we don't have, but we're not willing to put in the what to get it? The work. The time, the energy, the money to get there, whatever it happens to be. I'd like to be an EMDR therapist, right? But it costs about $1,400 to get certified in that. I don't know if I want to put $1,400 into it, but I'd really like to offer the service. And there's a person in town that's just getting some of that training in, and I'm like, man, I wish I could do that. I'm happy he's getting it because we'll have somebody in town that offers it because we don't right now. But I'm not mad at him or upset with him or wish him to fail on it. I'm actually happy he's getting it, right? But it pushes me to say, if he can get it, then maybe I can go ahead and.
What is EMDR?
It's a type of trauma therapy. And so, what do we do with that, right?
I keep a quote I had written it down by Theodore Roosevelt. Is comparison is the thief of joy.
Mm-hmm. Because what does it do?
It steals your joy.
Because you no longer are happy with what?
What you got.
What you have. Man, I just bought a new truck. That's the problem with having the one-upper friend. Anybody having a one-upper friend? That no matter what you do, they got a what?
One up. They've done it.
We can't use the word in the definition. Right?
They've either done it or done it better.
Done it better. Or they have it better. You buy a new truck, they see your truck, what do the next day?
Go back and get a newer one.
Go get a bigger truck, a newer truck, a better truck, a whatever truck. Oh, look, I got these tires. And then their buddy goes and gets bigger tires. Oh, I got my truck jacked up. Well, they go jack their truck up higher. Or they go get a sports car, and then their buddy goes get the next best sports car. Right? Anybody ever seen that, right? Then we get caught up in a concept called keeping up with the Joneses. What does that mean? We are never satisfied with where we are. We're not happy with our situation. We become jealous of what our neighbor, the Joneses, has, and we've got to try to keep topping them. What's that do to us? Where does your focus become? Yourself. Why is that a problem?
Listen to what the preacher said this morning.
Mm-hmm.
It removes your desire to serve.
Mm-hmm. What if it's in service to God that you become this or this man? I wish I could preach like that guy. Man, I wish I could teach a class like that person. Man, I wish I had a church that had that many members. You know one of the biggest problems for ministers today? You know what their biggest problem is? They're envious. What are they envious of? Say that again.
Size of the congregation.
Size of the congregation. Man, look at their new building. Man, I wish my new building had a coffee shop in it, and a gymnasium, and a bookstore. Man, I wish my podium would rise up out of the center of the stage and flash and screens and smoke and light. Man, I wish it could do all
Taylor
that.
Swift concert.
Huh?
I said it'd be like a Taylor Swift concert.
Don't be a Swiftie, right?
Well, I'm not.
It's, but you know, it's very easy. I'm sorry, I left the TV on. I apologize. I didn't even notice that. I'm talking. And it's very easy to become jealous of what this church or that church has had. And then that jealousy becomes what towards that church that seems to be doing so well?
Becomes your focus.
Becomes your focus, your drive. How do you start looking at them? What do you start looking for?
Flaws.
Flaws.
I drove my sister by World Outreach one day in Murfreesboro.
In Murfreesboro? Mm-hmm.
And she said, that's all for show.
It's a beast. Anybody ever been to World Outreach? I've been in the building before. It's a phenomenal building. It would make a great convention center. I mean, it's insanity. It's ridiculous. Anyway, but we start to look for ways that we can criticize. That's what I was looking for. Was dig at them, criticize them, start to find ways to tear them down. And we're not tearing them down because of something they did. We're tearing them down because of why?
Our own inadequacies.
Yes, our own failure to reach whatever it is, or why didn't I get hired by this church, or why am I not doing this, or why don't I have this, or why don't I, right? We become envious of that. And then you start, I've heard that within the Church of Christ. Many of you would think we'd be better than that, wouldn't you? But I've heard it within the Church of Christ. Well, that church, the only reason they're doing it is they're not really teaching the Word. Oh, they've really went worldly with their teaching. They let a lot of things pass that God wouldn't let pass.
I heard it put like this. Anytime you see a youth group of several hundred kids, it's more about entertainment.
Anybody ever heard that? Don't raise your hand. Anybody ever said that?
And they say it without any knowledge of what's being taught. Never attended there.
Anybody ever heard that Washington Street gets kind of a raw deal outside of our building? Anybody ever heard that? If you've not heard it, you don't talk to people, right? Why do you think that is? Jealousy. Do you know most of the churches in this county are an offshoot of who? This congregation. Now, churches like Mimosa are not. You know, they're historical community churches. But if you look at the two other larger churches in the community, they are direct splits from this congregation because of some kind of anger or frustration. And then, what happens? Division. Right? We end up in division. Right? It happens within the church. This process, envy, jealousy, covetousness, and falsehood, happens within the faith. If you don't think it does, you're not paying attention to the world around you. Right? We are called not to be envious. Actually, I would argue we are called to congratulate or build up our brother or sister in their accomplishments, whatever that happens to be. We're supposed to, I would argue, to be happy for them. Right? Good job, I'm really happy for that. And then if we want some semblance, you will never have what they have. Right? You will never have that car. You'll never have that house unless you buy that house. That would be weird. Right? But then you won't have the furniture that's in the house. Well, unless you buy the furniture. Then you won't have the personality of the house because that'll change. Right? Because when one person moves out and another person moves in, it changes the personality or the energy of the house. Right? You will never have exactly what they have. You will only be able to create what you are able to create. Right? Right? Without comparing them to some, right? They can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to the other. Envy, by the author says, is a self-perpetuating cycle. Boundaryless people feel empty and unfulfilled. Why would that be a boundaryless person? What do you think? If you're envious, why is that a lack of boundaries?
You're always going to tear down. You're not going to build up.
Okay, well, that's an action of the boundarylessness. Do you have a boundary for yourself? I am not going to discount myself. Bubba was talking about this a little bit. Discount myself because I don't think I measure up to somebody else. And if I don't feel like I'm doing what I should be doing because I'm not at this point, what do? I don't look out and blame the world because I didn't get there. Well, that's just because he's in a new community that his church is doing so good. Or that's just because, he's preaching Satan and not Jesus in his church, and Satan's blessing them and not God. And no. We look at it and say, man, I wonder if we can bring people to God like that. And so you know what? If I want a house like that, that means I have to understand how I have to put myself forward to get that. If I want to have the knowledge, anybody know somebody that can quote the Bible verse for verse? Sherry talks about an old man that went to her church at Fanning Heights in Huntsville when she was growing up. And he had went blind at some point. But before he had went blind, he had memorized the Bible cover to cover. And you could name a verse, he could tell you exactly. And in the King James Version. That's even harder, right? But he had memorized the Bible. And so when he was listening to a sermon or whatever it happened to be, he could... Who would like to be like that? Nobody raises their hand to that.
I know people
Right?
that have memorized books like the Book of James.
Right? This guy knew the whole Bible. Man, I'd really like to be like that. Well, that's just because he had some special gift from God, memorization. He probably had that memory thing that he had what do they call it?
Eidetic, photographic memory.
What's the word?
Eidetic.
Eidetic, right? He had photographic memory. If he saw it, he memorized it, right? And it was like he was looking at that image every time he thought about it. You could give him a page in the Bible that he used. He could tell you every word on that page, right? Well, that's what he had because God blessed him with that. That's why. And so that's really envy. I'm envy of maybe a gift he has. Instead of saying, you know what? If I want to memorize the Bible, then I need to either read up on how to memorize correctly, and then I have to do what? Put in the effort, right? Part of the boundarylessness of it is we're not willing to put in the effort to get what we feel we are entitled to. Who hates that word? I do. Right? We don't, and then we get mad at the person who has it. Right? So the boundaryless of it comes that we are not willing to put in the time to get it. What was Satan's sin? He wanted
To be like God.
He wanted to be like God, and look what it did. Look what it cost Satan. That might sound like a weird thing to say, but at one time Satan was what? He was an angel. And there were whole legions of angels that went with him.
He was a beautiful angel.
Look what it cost him. His envy and jealousy cost him. What will it cost you? What will that cost me? Right? We all search for a thing called joy. The envious person lacks what?
Joy.
Can I get a class that responds? They lack joy. Because they cannot be content with what they don't have. Right? I talk about my cell phone sometimes. I really like my cell phone. It's up here doing the recording for us today. I really enjoy my cell phone. I like to have the newest equipment out there. For the first time ever, Sherry has a newer phone than me.
Oh.
Man, and I like to be an early adopter to some things. But she's like, my phone was like 9 months old because it's Caitlin's fault that I ended up with this one. And then she went out and got that one. And then she says, this is the first time ever I have a newer phone than you. So she did what? She was all prideful. It's one of the other 7 deadly sins, right? I know 7 deadly sins aren't necessarily spelled out in Scripture like these are the 7 deadly sins. But there are 7 things, what? That God, what's the word?
Abomination.
Hates. Hate is a very, very powerful word. I think of the word hate in a context of if you hate somebody, you wish they were dead or never existed. To hate somebody feels like that. God hates these 7 behaviors that we have. They're not actions. They can be actions, but they are from where? Where does envy come from? Is that a physical thing or an internal, emotional, mental thing?
Internal.
It's internal. It's an emotional, mental feeling where you are upset that somebody has something you have and you're not willing to put forth the effort to what? To get it. So, one of the laws is envy will keep us, if we don't set the correct boundaries, envy will keep us from being the best that we can be because we are not setting boundaries for ourselves against how we feel, again, about another person. We're not setting a boundary. That's an us boundary. That's not a that person's boundary, right? It's not Ray's fault he's got a cool truck. Well, it is Ray's fault. But it's not Ray's fault that I'm envious of his what? Of his truck. It's not Sherry's fault, even though she rubbed my face in it, that I'm jealous of her phone. I'm really not jealous of her phone. But the point is, right, it's not their fault. I feel the way I feel. That is solely 100% on who? On me. If you are jealous of somebody and you have trouble wishing them best, that's a problem in you. My friend Jason, when I was up in Nashville, I was working for Walgreens and I was an executive assistant manager, just one position below store manager. My buddy Jason got promoted to a store before I did. We had started the program together. We were in the same store as executive assistant managers, and he got promoted for me. It took me 5 months to call him up and congratulate him. I was envious of him. I was jealous of his promotion. Because I wanted to get promoted in 3 years. He got promoted in 3 years. I got promoted in 3.5 years. It was 6 months later. Not long after I did what? I called him up. I apologized to him for not wishing him congratulations and that I was jealous of his promotion. I called him up and I apologized to him and I congratulated him and wished him the best. And we're still friends to this day. It's like the next day I got what? I got promoted. Had no idea it was coming. It was almost like God was waiting for me to what?
Apologize. To make it right.
To make it right. To understand what was going on inside of me. If we understand this, things in our life will change dramatically and drastically.
And that 4-letter word, envy, that's tearing this country apart right now. Student loans.
It's even more base than that. It's between the haves and have-nots. Right? We create envy within culture. We create envy within age groups. We create envy within colors of skin. What is his name? Vadi Bakum says, we are not black and white. We just have different levels of melatonin in our skin. We are exactly the same other than melatonin content. And if you look at Tammy's swarthy skin and my pure white skin, we have different melatonin tones. Ray's. We all have different... Anyway, that creates it. Man, I wish ladies, how many of you I don't think guys do this as much, but ladies, how many of you growing up wish you could get a tan like that girl? Or had hair like this girl? Man, I wish my hair was naturally curly. And then the girl with naturally curly hair says, man, you don't want it on a humid day. And you're looking like a chia pet, right? Envy will destroy your ability to be content. And that has nothing to do with anybody else. All right, everybody. Thank you all very much. Thank you for your comments. We will see you next time. The next law is activity. We'll figure that one out down the road.